Welcome to Design Magnified. This is a 12-section video and workbook series created to help you learn interior design, all while growing closer to God in the process. God is mysterious and all-knowing. I don't claim to know all of what his desires are, nor do I claim to understand all of his knowledge. Rather, I recognize that we can gain much wisdom and understanding from studying his word together. And that's the intent of this series, to seek to know more of him and his desire in both design and for us in our homes. I have prayed for each and every one of you, and I'm so glad that you're here. I know that God has a plan for you to grow through this program and certainly to grow closer to him in the process. So let's give the glory and design back to God together as we dive deep in studying the works of his almighty hands. Let's get started. Before we talk about some of the gains of this workshop, I want to take a moment to talk about what this workshop is not. This is not me getting some personal epiphany from God that nobody else on the planet can access or get. This program is not about me at all, and it's definitely not about me shaming you into doing anything. It's also not about telling you there's only one way of doing things. Now, just as you would go to a baker and he might give you a suggestion on to maybe mix the dry ingredients first, we can gain tips from people who have experience in things. And through prayer, and as we're going to study in God's Word, we can get some demonstrations on how to do the following. We will magnify our designer. We'll study design-related discoveries from his Word and creation. We'll learn how to apply basic skills in color, lighting, balance, scale, and proportion, all with God in mind. Isn't that incredible? I mean, we can access all of these things just by looking outside and studying them. We're also going to learn to seek a closer relationship with God as a result. Sometimes people have anxiety trying to make selections for their home. When something comes in front of you and you have to make decisions, it can become overwhelming. Sometimes people fight in their homes to get what they want. They'll even hide purchases. Churches can even divide over the color of carpet selections. It's like we aren't taught how to handle design and where it comes from and how to do it. So we're going to start off this series by considering the fact that God is the designer. He made everything. And one of the first characteristics we learn about God is that he is a designer and we are created in his image. So read with me in Genesis 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. I encourage you to continue reading through the rest of the creation story to get a better grasp, because we'll be talking a lot about it here in the next few slides. But as we know that all of God's creation points to him, that can be found in Psalm 19, 1 through 6. If you want to turn there with me, I'll read that as well. The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. Day after day, they pour forth speech. Night after night, they display knowledge. There is no speech or language where their voice is not heard. Their voice goes out into all the earth, their words to the ends of the earth. In the heavens, he has pitched a tent for the sun, which is like a bridegroom coming forth from his pavilion, like a champion rejoicing to run his course. It rises at one of the heavens and makes its circuit to the other. Nothing is hidden from its heat. Our very own culture has removed the origins of where our inspiration for design comes from. You'll hear phrases like Mother Nature, what's my design style, my identity through this design is. And that's just a language that we kind of casually toss around. Again, I'm not shaming anybody on this. I'm guilty of it as well. But this program, starting off here, just rewiring our brains to recognize that God is the designer. He spoke the world into existence. And if we believe that, can't we join with creation and point to him as well in our designs? So this is a Chladni plate. The first time I saw one of these, I couldn't help but think of God's creation. So God speaks into chaos and brings order. The waters form, things separate, mountains come up, trees and fruits, seed-bearing plants, animals, people. It just blows my mind that at the sound of his voice, all of creation comes into existence. So when I see this Chladni plate, which is a piece of metal on top of a speaker that plays different frequencies, And we can see what different frequencies and pitches visually look like. And they're pretty amazing in pattern and shape. So thinking about that sound has shape. The sound of God's voice. What would that have sound like? It's pretty fun to think about. Later on, we're going to talk a little bit about scale drawings. But before we can even talk about drawings in a room, we need to first consider our scale compared to God's. Now, I'm not a mathematician, I'm not a scientist, so there's another disclaimer for you, but just hang on with me and listen to some of these numbers. They're pretty remarkable. We know that you can fly around the Earth on a jet, and it takes about 40 hours, almost 2 days to get around the world, right? Compare that to the sun, the same speed. It takes about 4,360 hours, or 181 days, also known as half a year. The distance between the Earth and the sun is so far away, they had to create their own measurement for it called an AU, an astronomical unit, about 150 million kilometers. Picture a jet being on a jet for 17 to 19 years. Now think about God living outside of that. Compared to the sun, we really are a speck of dust. Yet God cares about you. He cares about me. Had the sun been designed any closer, the waters would boil. Or had they been any further, we'd be living on a frozen rock, incapable of sustaining life. Had his designs been the slightest bit off, we couldn't survive. I think it's clear that design matters. He knows what he's doing. We can trust him. And then if you read, King David talks about in the Psalms all of these things just by looking up. He didn't have a jet plane, but he got the gist of everything. O Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth. He just looked up in the heavens and he got it, didn't he? Sometimes we forget to look up, don't we? He knew how majestic our God was without a jet. Do we? Do we even stop for a moment before we run to Pinterest or other sources for ideas? Again, I'm not shaming you. You're probably going to hear me say that a lot. I go to these sources as well, and you should know that. I've been in design for 13 years. But it's my aim, and part of this program is a reminder to myself that there's one who wants us to come to him first in all of our ways. In this next section, we're going to talk about why we design. It's kind of in us, isn't it? We can't turn our eyes away from seeing these shows and the suspense of what the outcome's going to look like. Reels are about 15 seconds to a minute, and they capture our attention. We'll even watch things on loop to get a little bit more information. We just want to do this. Have you ever thought about why we want to design? Let's explore that together. The first time in the Bible that we read about God's Holy Spirit being in someone is when he put it in a gifted artisan. Filled with the Holy Spirit of God, with skill, ability, and knowledge in all kinds of crafts to make artistic designs for work. Let's get in our Bibles and go check out Exodus 31, 1 through 5. The Lord said to Moses, "See, I have chosen Bezalel, son of Uri, and son of Hur, of the tribe of Judah, and I have filled him with the Spirit of God, with skill, ability, and knowledge in all kinds of crafts, to make artistic designs for work in gold, silver, and bronze, to cut and set stones, to work in wood, and to engage in all kinds of craftsmanship." It's pretty remarkable. So I think it's clear to say where these skills come from, right? They come from God. So we should acknowledge him in those ways. This next part says, given the ability and willing to do the work. Let's go to Exodus 36, a couple pages away here. And we'll read 1 and 2. All right, so Bezalel, Oholiab, and every skilled person to whom the Lord has given skill and ability to know how to carry out all of the work of constructing the sanctuary are to do the work just as the Lord has commanded. Then Moses summoned Bezalel and Oholiab and every skilled person to whom the Lord has given ability and who was willing to come and do the work. So I don't like to say certain words. I want to make sure I get this right. I'm never saying that we are even with God. We never partner with him in that way. But through a relationship with his Holy Spirit, He can use us as a vessel to do things. And we just bring to the party our willingness. So that's really what I want to communicate here. He takes a willing heart and he instills his Holy Spirit in us to do the work if we're willing. So kind of thinking about those things. Where does the Spirit come from? Where do these gifts of ability and knowledge of kinds of crafts and design come from? It comes from his Spirit. And if we're willing to do the work that he sets before us, it's not a partnership as if we're 50-50 and equal to God by any means, but we get to consider him in all of our ways and let him help to produce things through our hands. And that's pretty amazing. So you might be asking yourself, maybe not, but I just felt like I needed to address this. Why are people killing it on social media with no mention of God, right? We can look around and there's some pretty amazing designs out there. There's also something called common grace. And if you know the story of Judas, he was right alongside the disciples with Jesus, doing all of the things from the outside. He looked probably splendid, healing people, doing all of the things. But on the inside, God sees the heart, right? So we can produce things with our hand that he's still comes from him, that he allows us to do. And he will also give us over to things too. So just keeping that perspective and a little bit of a slight elevation so we're not running away from him and the things that we're doing, just coming back to the Father and knowing, hey, is my heart posture right in this? I'm not saying that if you don't, consider and do all of the things in this program, you're a Judas. By no means am I saying that, but just taking the understanding of, what we're seeing out there in the world is beautiful and alluring. And there was also a tree that was alluring that we kind of made a mistake with, right? So just food for thought there, that where the Spirit comes from. And if we're willing to consider him in all of our ways, I think there'll be new fruits that he is always willing to give. So for those of you who are listening to this and not watching, I've got a little bit of a scale here from 1 to the number 6, and I have broken down into 6 different categories. The question is, where on the spectrum of creativity do you think you fall? You can jot it down later or in your workbook, and also kind of consider where you think you would like to be. And lastly, consider anybody in your household as well, where you think they are at, and consider seasons. Maybe you've been in different places on the spectrum, and ask yourself why. So number 1 says, I haven't been creative since I was a child. Number 2 says, I have an appreciation for creativity and I want to learn more. 3, I like doing creative work, but I'm not sure I'd consider myself a creative. Number 4 says, I love being creative, but I just don't have the time. Number 5 says, I am a creative and I love learning and taking in all things related to creativity. Number 6 says, in his image, I create and I have a relationship with my maker, working side by side on creative projects. Again, I'm not considering ourselves equal to God when I say words like side by side, just a little disclaimer there. But we do have a relationship with God through Jesus Christ, who made a way for us to come before the Father. And if you don't know what I'm talking about when I say language like that, please message if you have questions. I would love to walk you through that. Considering where you are on here, there's no right or wrong answer. I think the goal we've made pretty clear is that we want to be closer to the Father in creativity and in design. So just kind of look at that and see, what seasons am I here? When have I been there? And where would I like to be? In this next section, we're going to take a look at design in the Bible. There are not enough pages and slides to talk about all of the design that is in the Bible. So we're just going to highlight some things that we think we can use as tools to kind of learn from. There's a clear literary design patterns in the opening of Genesis. You'll hear a rhythm, let there be light, and it was good, let there be, and then there was this, and he says it was good at the end. So you can see that type of a pattern. There's also, outside of an oral hearing the pattern, there's a visual symmetry, where the first 3 days consist of unformed and unfilled environments. And then the next 3 days, God forms and fills those spaces. And we're going to talk a lot about this. It's kind of one of the foundation tools through prayer and spending time with God that I felt he was really highlighting to me. You can study interior design from lots of different sources, and they will kind of walk you through the same pattern, but there's no talk of God. So it's amazing to me when I hear other people say, do this first, then do this and do that. And my eyes and heart went to Genesis, and it's all there. It's where it comes from. So God creates a pattern of rule, fill, rule. And I'll be showing you a diagram here in a moment that helps to explain all of this. So how often do we allow God to rule our homes, let alone even consider him in the design process? God is the only one who decides what's good. He says so right from the get-go. After he creates everything, he says it's good. That's where our standard of good comes from. Yet we like to sometimes just see all the things that we see in the repetition before our eyes and think that the nearest trend is what is good because people tell us that, when everybody on the planet has a different opinion. So it's good to consider God first so he can give us some clarity on all of our decision making. God invented form and function. He created both trees that function and are pleasing to the eye, right? And some of them that had fruit. There are verses in Genesis where you can learn about that as well. And then God provides specific, tangible instructions for things like the construction of Noah's Ark and the tabernacle and all of its furniture elements. There's also lots of creation stories all throughout Scripture, and we won't take the time, unfortunately, to go through all of them, but I encourage you to put on this lens of creation and design and just plow it through your Bible and ask him to show you more. Even thinking about in Exodus when he's parting the waters and giving dry land from the walkthrough, it's almost like a creation, a new beginning for his people. So it's pretty incredible when you start to think about these rhythms and the patterns that he has throughout the Bible and where his designs come from. So here you can see that we broke down the creation story, day 1 through 6. You can see on the first day, he creates light. And then on day 2, we have the sky and the sea. On day 3 is land. And then those spaces are all unformed and unfilled. Now, we don't like to, as homeowners and renters, like to sit here in an unformed, unfilled space very long, do we? We like to decorate and redecorate, buy more pillows and fill, right? That's kind of our nature. But God pauses and creates one thing, empty and unformed first. Then he goes back with the intention of his design and executes the design plan by filling each space with their kind. So according to the lights, he makes the sun and stars. And in the middle here, you'll see that pattern of rule, fill, rule. We don't control the seasons of the sun and the stars, right? That's out of our hands. And then the sky and the sea on day 2, you can see shooting across there on day 5, there's a pairing with birds and fish. He puts the belonging creatures in their surrounding designated spaces. On day 3, the land, and then it's not just being filled, but there's to rule. He makes man and animals on day 6, and man's to rule over. So you can see this pattern of things that we don't control and things that we do control, right? And then the circle over on the right is day 7. It's set apart for rest. So we can apply this to our design of our home, and we will get to a slide that breaks everything down and we'll go through it step by step. But just as a blanket kind of umbrella statement, we can observe just by looking at how he designed creation to know that he lived outside of it, right? He wasn't in there yet. I mean, he's a part of it, but what I'm saying is that for us to be in our house, sometimes we need to reside outside of our creation. Go big with God. High up. His ways are higher than ours, so we want to reside outside. His spirit was hovering over the waters. He spoke. He created time. So these are all things that we can learn. There's so much from the Genesis story that we can learn about salvation and everything, but we're just going to kind of hover in this design series with some of the things that make sense to what we're pertaining. But we can also learn in John's creation story that the Word became flesh. Christ was part of the Trinity from the beginning. God sets the standards of what is good. We've kind of talked a little bit about that to begin with, and how we can trust him in design and trust what he says is good. He evaluates and declares what he's saying, and he assesses it as being good. The creation story showcases a deep and intricate master plan. He knows the end from the beginning, yet we just bury our heads and follow around aimlessly in stores and just grab things that we like. We don't think about an end result, and we certainly don't clean things out to start from fresh. He created space with purpose. He created the end in mind. He meets our needs from day 1. He establishes our identity and gives us a purpose. We can learn a lot from his master plan. He is our purpose. He is our calling to worship him. And I don't know about you, but if you're anything like me, we can forget about that inside of our own homes. Our homes can just be filled with things. And I do hope that you have lots of things that you like and your family likes and loves. I hope you enjoy and have a wonderful, blessed life. But I just want us to all focus on spending a little bit more time in our homes, acknowledging Him in all of our ways. And as I mentioned before, the sun and the stars govern the day and the night. We don't control that. However, God called us to rule and subdue the land and all that is in it. He designed the start and completion of His creation with governing masters. So we can consider that in our design plan too. What parts do we let God govern and what parts do we govern? So now we have some foundation. We know who God is. We know our relationship to Him. We know where the spirit and the wants and the desires for design comes from. Let's check out how we can get started. It's a little bit of a story time right now. So you can see here is one of my favorite actresses on one of my favorite types of chairs, a spinny chair. I love spinny chairs and I incorporate them in most designs I do for clients. It's great because it's a conversational tool. You can turn and face whatever directions in the room you want to. Kids love them. If there's a spinny chair in your house, they're going to find it. And I think it makes us all feel a little bit younger if we get to play in a spinny chair. So that aside, I had a spinny chair that fit me like a glove. It was this 70s barrel chair. It had that nasty pleather about it. By the time it was a hand-me-down to me, it was starting to crack and peel. Buttons were falling off. It was an eyesore, but it made me comfortable. I would throw my legs up on the side and it just felt like a glove, like a little hug. I loved that chair. So we moved into our brand new home, and my husband was very graciously asking me, what are we going to do about that chair? So finally, I decided, okay, I'm going to put it on the marketplace. Now, a little bit about me. I love the song Revelation Song. It's one of my favorite worship songs, and I often listen to it on the way to clients' houses. Have a little worship time in my car by myself. No one can hear me. It's grand. Well, when I put the chair up on Marketplace, I received this message, and I recognized the name. It was the writer of the song of Revelation Song. So I had to message her, and I'm like, hey, did you write Revelation Song? And I said, I know this is really weird that I'm checking you out. And she's like, I wanted to make sure it wasn't a psycho killer, but she responded with yes, and I checked your profile out too. And she gave me some really encouraging words that I needed to hear in that season. And this is just one tiny example of how God can intercept into our day when we just let go of something and have a willing heart, a willing spirit to hear from Him. It just blew my mind out that out of where I live in the middle of nowhere, that the songwriter of one of my favorite modern worship songs was communicating to me and giving me encouragement. I don't think that could have ever happened without me letting go of this chair that she thought had good bones. So you can see I have this verse here, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. To get started in design, remember we want to reside outside of creation with God, prayerfully going through our homes with Him in mind. And I've got a next slide here that's going to give us some step-by-steps to walk through this process. So for our listeners who aren't looking at the slides right now, I'm going to read through everything, and this is part of our workbook, and I believe we have a PDF available as well if you'd like to print it out and use it as a tool. Put it on your calendar according to what works for your schedule. And some of these things may apply to you, some of these things may not. And I just encourage you that if there is something that is rubbing you in a different way, pray about it. See what God's having to say to your heart and how He wants to speak to you. So this is titled Unformed, Unfilled, the Why. I recommend going through with a lens of why do I have these items? And do I have too tight of a grip on anything? Is anything a burden that someone gave me? Your home should be a testimony about your family. What is it saying? So spend some time on those questions. There's no need to rush. Next, I have the point of whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord and not man. That's Colossians 3:23. And then my last little tip here before we read through room by room is to host God as your guest. Prayerfully consider all of the things that you're making decisions about. I don't know about you, but when I have company come over, I usually get the best cleaning done. I don't love cleaning particularly. If I have nothing else going on, I absolutely do. But when I have guests, there's just motivation to get to the deadline to get things done. So think about that. What if God is your guest? Because he's already there anyway. He already knows your heart. He knows everything that you're keeping and why. And just ask him, am I having too tight of a grip on anything? So let's go through. Here are some things for inspiration. Again, there may be all kinds of other things God may show you in this process, and maybe he'll show you nothing and you'll be like, oh, I'm good, God. But what we have written down here is, what sounds are filling your home? Has it been a while since you played music? Podcasts, scripture, worship music, and sermons are great habits to introduce. So there's all levels of design, things that we tangibly have. There's sounds, there's scents, there's all kinds of things we can do to make a home feel welcoming, and that's different and unique for each person. So let's walk over into the kitchen area. The freezer and the pantry. Take an inventory. Meal plan with what you have. Sometimes, if you're like me, you can store a lot of food in the freezer and it gets shoved in the back, and sometimes things can be wasteful. In your desk and workspace, purge any papers and extra supplies. Pay bills. Anything that's sitting out that you've been holding on to for a long time, that's sentimental. If it has meaning and it tells a little bit of a story about yourself, you might want to be putting it out instead of hidden away under a pile. Maybe it's something unique that you can frame. Maybe it's a recipe from your grandmother. Maybe it's a little love note from your spouse. There's a piece of art that your kid handed you and it's under a stack of papers. See if you can find a purpose for it. And again, we do all of these things prayerfully so that we don't have too tight of a grip on anything, and we're also not hurting anyone else in our household in the purging stage. So we have here in the living area, purge toys if you're in that season of life, books, DVDs, hobbies that you don't do anymore. The next part says, what do you have extra of that you can give to someone else in need? Because that's part of our walk as Christians in faith, is to see the needs of others around us. Next, I have purge and donate seasonal decor you don't use as you put away. It's a really hard discipline. I don't know about you, but to put away your Christmas items and recognize the things that you didn't use before you put your Christmas things away. If you're anything like me, you want to just get it all put away, and we tend to do it really quick. But I also sometimes have things in bins of storage that I haven't used in years, so I have to pay attention to that. Why am I holding on to it? Is it just laziness, like I'm not getting to it, or do I think there'll be a different season that I'll use it? Evaluate again, like each person's different. Some of these things may not even apply to your home, but if it does, great. That's why we're going through all of this. So this next little one is something I actually got from like a 1950s or 60s housekeeping book from my grandmother that I inherited. It's the quick bag cleanup. Be honest, walk through and throw away room by room anything that you don't need or use. It's just kind of taking up space, collecting dust, and it's a good to just grab a bag and then make some quick decisions on the things that you know you can make quick decisions on. Everybody has different guidelines about washing linens, whatever habit works for you or your family, or maybe you want to step that up a little bit. I know there are seasons where I need to pay more attention to it. That's why we have this as a checklist for you as well. Wash linens and make a habit to make your beds. These are easy things that you can do to make your house feel like, I want to say, like a hotel when you walk in, and it's restful for your spouse and your children. It teaches a good discipline so that we're not promoting things of laziness, just doing something in repetition. I know it might sound odd, but making your bed is a simple first thing you can do in the morning. There's a whole video that's out there I can try and link later. I think it's somebody in the military who's talking about the benefits of making your bed. And then I have here in the closet a clothing purge. Allow yourself quite a lot of time for this one. Most people, not all, have things with closets going on. Some of them are heart postures. There could be just a lot of different layers there. But ask yourself what you've worn and what you haven't worn in a while, and does it fit anymore? Just be honest. I know I like to hold on to things that, one day that's going to fit again, or different things, and sometimes styles change and you just don't even want what you had and you waited too long for it. Maternity clothes, when you get out of maternity clothes, different clothes sometimes remind us of different seasons in our life, and it's okay to hang on to some things. But, again, prayerfully consider, can somebody else benefit from having what is just sitting here for a year or more in my closet? And it's not a fun job. I'm going to be honest with you. There was a season after having children that I wept going through my closet. So have grace for yourself and patience. Don't set this crazy deadline to do it necessarily in one day. You might need a couple days or a week, or depending on the size of your closet, you just allow what you need for you. And then I put down here the toiletries and medicine cabinets. Those are pretty easy things to look at dates and just get rid of things that have expired. And chances are you probably have a daily ritual of what works for your skin, knowing the colors to put on of the makeup that work for you. Chances are you probably have things that you have tried that don't work great that you could give to another family member or dispose of if it's something that's not sanitary. So check those items out. Again, you might need to set some time for those. These are areas in the home that tend to collect lots of things. And then we have inbox, app, and social media cleanup. I am terrible with this one. I have an obscene amount of emails. I do try to regularly go through, select all, mark as read, but I get a lot of vendors and things, so my inbox might look a little more chaotic than yours. But there's different things we can do to clean up and simplify things that breathe a little bit more life and a breath of fresh air into the places our eyes are ingesting. And then finally, in your master suite, your bedroom, wherever you rest, I have here rest and spend time in the Word with your guest and ask him what he thinks about your home. So, this is a personal thing, just a tool for another deeper personal relationship with God. I hope you enjoy it and I hope it's helpful. So that first step is to take a little bit of time going through your room by room of your spaces and determining what you can get rid of to help us to get back to that unformed, unfilled state. That can just be tangibly getting rid of things that don't mean anything to you. It could also be things of the heart that God's removing, right? And then sometimes there's just things from the past that we don't understand about ourselves. So it's good to think back, I believe, to your very first bedroom. So let's have some fun. So this is one of my first bedrooms when I was a little girl. When I'm looking and thinking through it, and I hope that you're going to do the same in this activity, there are things that I obviously grow out of rainbow bright sheets, but there are little rhythms I have that makes me who I am. So from the beginning, I always liked blue. And the finials on top of my bed, I would take off. I'd climb up on my bed and take those off and pretend they were microphones. And to this day, I still really like blue and I still love singing. As I got older, I would draw my room design and make my own design plans. So there was some interior design coming out at an early age that I didn't really recognize till I got much older and look back to, oh yeah, I used to do that, right? So ask yourself, what are some things that you liked? What colors were your room? What did you do in your room? And what types of hobbies did you have? Did you write? Did you sing? Did you do music? Did you color? What type of toys did you play with? What type of creativity? When we're our youngest, I feel like we're the most pure and raw form of ourselves. And they say that happens again when you age. And I would like for us to be more aware of those who our true selves are, so we can bring it before the Lord, let Him change anything He wants changing, but also let Him reveal the beauty of who He made us to be uniquely, because no one's going to know how to design your home better than the God who made you. So I have over here too that I spent most of my time playing outside, and I still love being barefoot outside. It's just who I am. I use my imagination. Creativity is just hardwired in my brain. I also like to use my little craft table there and do some crafts and pretend I was cooking. And then the carpet of one of my bedrooms, I got to pick out. I was a little spoiled in that department, and my parents let me pick out, and I picked out a carpet that reminded me of fluffy blue clouds of the sky and all that. So ask yourself what was important and why, and is it still important? Why or why not? And then ask God to reveal you the meaning of the things that you picked when you were a kid. And I understand and recognize if your childhood was maybe not as favorably memorable. So if this is a hard challenge for you, ask God for healing in that department. And that is something that I pray in advance for anybody in this program who this process is painful for them to think back on their childhood for whatever reason. I pray that God would give grace and just healing and help the process like only the great counselor of our Lord can. So we've just studied how God created everything into existence by speaking day 1 through day 6 and resting on day 7. So let's take a look at his pattern and learn how to apply that to a structure that we can apply to our spaces. So just as God created light on day 1, his word is a lamp unto our feet. So we acknowledge him and we aim to reside with him in an unformed, unfilled space, saying, Lord, I am here, I am willing, and prayerfully considering him in all of the ways. And then we will tangibly work on a lighting plan to go with our rough draft. So we're going to start in an unformed, unfilled state on this left column with our rough draft. Then we'll do a scale drawing and move over to the right. So in day 2, God has the sky and sea. What does that do visually speaking? That creates a rhythm, a texture, and pattern of movement. You see the clouds move by. There's wind. The wind, his spirit hovered over the waters, right? So we can see movement of the wind in the waters and everything around us. And our spaces should have that same type of movement going on as well, so that we have life in the space. And then in day 3, he creates the land. We're going to work on balance, scale, and proportion, because just as man will reside in land, things need to look right and in the right spectrum and balance, right? So then we're going to come over to day 4, where God creates the sun and the stars. So now he's filling in this column. So we're going to fill with color and light selections. Then moving on to day 5, God creates the bird and the fish. So this is where on day 5, we're going to make our fabric selections, texture, mood, whatever selections that give you those intricate kind of a mood. The patterns and textures come through if you look at the birds and the fish. They're amazing details and color combinations. So it'll be fun to look over those things together. And then on day 6 is when God creates the animals and man. So we will reside back in our space and taking a look at everything that we've built together and asking God if it's good. And just as God creates rest on day 7, we will rest and also edit our space. So if you look at the sky, you're going to see that there's a blue sky with some clouds. There's always this negative space that God creates that's a break. Our world around us is not so busy that our eyes are fatigued. So we want to make sure that our interior spaces echo that as well. And we're going to break down each one of these bubbles in the upcoming slides so that it will all make sense. So thinking along the lines of a rough draft and why we do it, let's read Isaiah 55, 8 through 9. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. So this is like a literal translation. God's above, right? So when we're residing inside of our spaces, we're just looking around at all of the elevations and the things that are in front of us. So if we do a rough draft, that helps to remove our heart and our eyes, even more so from our design plans. We can now plan from an elevated outside exterior space where we're looking down into our rooms like a bird's eye view. So we're going to go through a little exercise. It's kind of fun since I'm not in every one of your homes, and I will probably sometime in this program offer a little bit more detailed, in-depth thing for your spaces. But for right now, since we don't have access to your homes today, it's fun to bring scripture to life. So go grab a piece of graph paper, and if you need to pause this and come back to the section, you can. I'm going to teach you briefly some tools to use for rough drawing before we do our exercise, just so you're familiar. This is called a rough drawing when things aren't perfect and we just get some loose sketches about what shape our space is. So look at your space, and I'm going to give you a space to work off of here in a little bit. But pay attention to the overall shape as well as where the walls might curve or bump out or bump in. You're going to draw that shape loosely. It's not about perfection here. Don't worry about scale yet. That's something we'll teach you in a little bit. This is a rough draft for a reason. Simply count for each wall and make each wall long enough so that you can take some notes in and around it. Once you get the basic shape, mark any doors, openings, and windows. Mark any permanent items that you are keeping, such as a fireplace, HVAC, that's your vents and different systems that might be bumping in your heating and cooling. If you look at this drawing here, the drawing on the left is showing that there's a solid wall. And then at the top, I like to mark north, south, east, and west too. It's another tool to do, but at the top you'll see that there's this bump in, that's for a fireplace. And then over on the right wall, you see some little tick lines that I made for a window to be there. And then on the bottom, we've got little partial lines because there's an opening to get into this room. So this is giving you an idea of how to kind of loosely do a rough drawing, okay? So now for your scale drawing exercise, we're going to have fun bringing some of scripture to life. Listen to the sound of my voice and take these instructions like Moses did in Exodus, okay? At the top of your page, mark an N for north. On the bottom of your page, write an S for south. On the left of your page, a W for west. And on the right side, an E for east. Make them small so you have room to draw in the middle of your page. Okay, we're going to draw the courtyard. The south side, so find your S, make it 150 cubits. Remembering that this is just a rough drawing, so we're not going to count anything out. You're just going to draw a line across that side of your page. Now, give it 20 posts. So you can just do little squares if you want, or little tick lines like I showed you for windows, but make 20 of them along that south side of your wall. Next, go to the west and make your line 50 cubits. So that's going to be a smaller line, right? It doesn't have to be to scale, but just get the general idea. And this is going to have 10 posts on it. While the north side, you're going to also make 150 with 20 posts. So that line should look a lot like its parallel line. And then on the east end, towards the sunrise, you're going to have 50 cubits again. So that's going to match the other side. Again, rough draft, whatever it looks like. And that is going to have 3 posts on each side of an entrance. So there'll be an opening for the entrance. And if you've done this exercise, feel free to rewind if you need to do it a little more slowly, but take a picture. I would love to see what everybody's rough drawings look like. This is also a great tool to help not only in your home, but to bring scripture to life, because God does spell out tangible directions, instructions for curtains, every last detail for the tabernacle and the ark. So it's fun exercise. So rather than just read parts that can seem kind of boring to get through, bringing them to life like this helps to imprint in your brain what God's actual word and design was. In the last exercise, we brought the Bible to life by drawing a rough sketch of what the courtyard might have looked like. So if that was your space, a room in your home, you would do the same thing, and then you would actually measure out each of the walls. And you would mark down however many feet and inches each wall is. It doesn't have to be down to the 16th. Don't worry about the ruler, though we do teach that in other videos in this program. This is a little bit higher level. So just make indications. And what you would do is you would assign 1 foot per square. That's how you draw to scale. You can use a ruler if you want. Any kind of straight edge helps to make it look a little more neat. But these types of drawings also help to communicate to builders, any other tradesmen that you might be working on, or if you're a do-it-yourselfer, it just helps you to remember exactly what everything's going to look like. And it helps you to see your space from a different level so that you can manipulate the furniture positions to know what will function best with your flow of traffic and just what is more aesthetically pleasing to you. So that's kind of your first step. And we're going to go in now to let there be lighting. You'll see here a couple images. I was on vacation with my family at Disney before they changed all the parks around, and I saw the big movie motion picture lights, those big spotlights that they shine up. And I don't know if I said it out loud or not, but I know I thought it in my heart. And I thought, I wonder where they came up with the idea to do these really cool lights, because they do grab your attention. And I'm not kidding. That same evening, this bottom picture was what the sunset was at that park. God's spotlights. And I believe that that's probably where we got the inspiration from. Ecclesiastes 1:9 says, "What has been will be again. What has been done will be done again. There is nothing new under the sun." So again, just giving God credit for everything. Now, how do we start to look at creation and bring that into our homes? We should be inspired. Spend time with God and His creation. What types of lighting do you see and how does it make you feel? So we're all going to respond to different environments in God's creation a little differently. Some people may be like, I love the heat of the desert. And some people will be like, no, I like to have snow in the wintertime. So pay attention to those types of things. What's unique to you and your family? Because that's going to help you to develop some rhythms in your interior spaces that you'll be drawn to, that speak to your personality and your sensitivities and things that you respond differently to. Things like lightning bugs, little twinkle lights. There's ways of getting these little magical moments inside of your home if that's something that you value. You can look at the fact that God designed animals' eyes to be mysterious and reflect in the night. Like we can all be drawn to different things. The moonlight on a river, there's reflective properties that we can bring into spaces that kind of evoke that nighttime of feeling. There's also snow and ice, when you get light reflecting on that sparkle. And then obviously we have the greater and lesser lights, the sun, the moon, and the stars. So let's take a look at an interior and get some inspiration on how we can bring God's creation into our lighting. So on your rough drawing and then your scale drawing, your first step is to make your lighting plan to make sure you have enough light in the space that you're working on. You want to make sure there's no dark corners and how you need to function in the space. Just ask yourself some of those questions and then considering God and how he does the different lighting and mooding that speaks best to you and your family. So in the image on the right, you're going to see at the top, we have the greater light. Also how God does the sun. That's the greater of the two, right? And then that's a chandelier here. It provides your overall lighting that will flood the entire space. On the left of that image, we have natural light. A window provides natural light that will illuminate the room during the day. So when you take those windows out, how does your room look at night? Now, it's okay for a bedroom to be more dim, but think about your working areas, your living space, your kitchen. You want to pay attention to make sure you have good task lighting and things that you need. So make note of areas you might need more light in. The table lamps are placed in front of mirrors, allowing for a glow reflection of the light back into the space. Remember me talking about a moon in the river and how the light will kind of glisten across and the reflective property comes out into the water. This is kind of that effect that you can bring what God's already doing out there. We can mimic it inside and give you that kind of moonlit feeling. We have the lesser lights, the table lamps, the wall sconces. Both types of lighting provide mood lighting as well as task-oriented lighting. So on the left here, we talk a little bit more detail. The greater lights is your main light source. It's also called ambient lighting, so you may hear that word thrown around. It provides your overall lighting to flood entire space. It can be can lights, ceiling light, or as we have in this image, a chandelier. So make sure you have a greater light in your room when your windows go away at night. And then next we have natural light. And I know that's not always, you can't always bust out a wall to get natural light, but this is just a type of lighting to consider. Also being mindful of the fact of what's going to happen when the natural light goes away. There's also the lesser lights, also known as task or accent lighting. This provides the soft, low lights for evening, highlights, dim, functional, etc. You're going to find these in your sconces, your lamps, your stair lighting, floor lighting, under cabinet lighting, and so forth. There's also reflective lights, and we mentioned this in the image over here that I had just went through. It says mirrors and glazing. This creates a glow that is reflected back into the space. So consider this a little checklist of different types of lighting and places that you can put them in unique ways that mimic what God does outside. Next, we're going to explore how we can consider rhythm, pattern, and texture in our interior design. So let's explore rhythm together. Rhythm is the flow or repetition of a pattern, and it creates action and movement in a space. A lot of times, this can be something that's an easy fix that's missing from a lot of interiors, and it's a clear way that we can bring what God does outside into our interiors as well. Think about a line of sheet music. It would be very boring if everything was the same monotone note. So we wouldn't want our homes to be that either. We should have a little bit of freedom and flexibility, but understanding how to have a rhythm that ties things together and makes it all cohesive. So here's another abstract thought for you. If you watch a movie, say The Wizard of Oz, the villain, the Wicked Witch comes on the screen and you might hear that music in your memory. You can do it with me. We hear these little cues even in movies that train our ears to tell our minds, oh, something's happening. There's conflict, right? Or maybe the hero comes in and you hear a save the day that just excites you and gets your ears to perk up. We can think about our interiors in the same way. If we think about each space and how it's related to the spaces around us, we can consider what types of rhythms we can create. We can do this through color, texture, all kinds of different concepts. But we're going to take a look here at what God does in his exteriors. If you look in the very far back, you can see some cold mountains. That type of design style could be maybe articulated as something sleek because it's cold to touch, it's angular, very simplistic. And then you come a little bit closer and you see these pines, and the pines could be considered rustic, right? If you come even closer, advancing to your eyes, you can see the wind is wisping the brush in the wind, and there's little tiny delicate flowers that are sprinkled throughout as little tiny accents. Now, how on earth does something sleek, rustic, and then kind of a prairie, casual, maybe farmhouse type vibe all work together? Because God's genius, right? We see this all the time in his creation, and we don't ever second guess what he's doing. You'd never say those mountains don't belong, but they catch your eye, right? Because there's a little bit of contrast. But if we look closely, we can find a rhythm. And you can take any scene that you like, wherever, if you like to go to the beach, if you like to go in the forest, if you like to be in the mountains, take a snapshot and study how God does it. Here, I would say the common denominator, the rhythm that carries all of these different styles and textures together would be the green. The green comes all the way up the mountains. The green can be found in the pines themselves, and its grounding element in the wispiness that we see in the foreground. So have fun taking some vacation pictures out and looking and seeing, what do I like about this? And how can I kind of abstractly assign different styles to what I'm seeing? Is it sleek and cold? Is it prickly? Is it rustic? Is it soft and delicate? So you can assign a lot of things that we see outside into your interiors as well. So the point of this exercise is to help renew our minds so that when we leave our four walls and we're outside, we can seek God through his creation and just celebrate and glorify him as we spy different things that we are used to seeing and surfing through when we're shopping for fabrics and different colors and textures. We can find all of this in his creation. If you look here, there's a damask pattern that is very popular. But next to it, I've got a picture that I took while I was on my back on a hammock looking up at the curled leaves. Can you see the resemblance there? Next, we've got lace and Queen Anne's lace. All of these things tend to come from looking outside at God's creation. And then there's the ikat, which is a unique pattern that takes a bit of working to make, and it can also be found in shells. I bought that when I was on vacation. I had to take a picture of it. And then we have the herringbone, which is so timeless. It's in flooring patterns and backsplashes and tiles. It's in our fabric and upholstery, and it comes from the bones of the fish. And then there's also the hexagons that are found in the honeycomb. That's a popular pattern that comes all the time in different shapes and sizes, as well as finding colors in unexpected places. Here you can see this vintage sweater that I also saw on a mushroom that was almost to the T of what man has recreated in a fabric that our eyes are drawn to. So oftentimes we don't even know why we like what we like. And it's because our eyes are surrounded in this paradigm of that God created, that he put all these textures and patterns around. And if you look for the things that God made, chances are those are the ones that are going to be more timeless and they won't be as trendy. You don't have to worry about, is this going to go out of style if it's something that our eyes are trained to seeing outside. Also, when you do this, kind of keep a catalog of it or use the one that I provided here. I believe we have some additional ones in the workbook as well. But you can start to classify in your mind what is more formal and what is casual. So you can say like the top two could be a little bit more formal, and then it can work its way a little bit more casual if you look at the rest of the sheet. You can categorize things in nature. When you're outside at the beach, you know, sometimes there's this washed up barge of wood that comes in there. It's more rustic, but the sand can be very sleek. The water can be very sleek. So you can find some different modern and rustic categories, like we talked about the mountains in the last scene. So spend some time take a look at where you're finding God's hand and different inspiration throughout his creation, as well as just appreciating him and glorifying him in the process. And let him reveal to you what textures you are most interested in. So we just talked about pattern. Pattern has that repetition and that rhythm. When you look at texture, there's often a pattern as well that can be found within it. But texture is something that both our eyes can see. It's experienced both visually as well as touch. So whereas you might see a fabric that has a print on it, you're not necessarily going to be able to feel with your hands that texture. It gives you a visual texture only throughout its pattern. So pattern and texture can kind of overlap a little bit, but there are two things to consider to make sure that everything is not just flat. You have some organic elements in each space as well. So this is why we break this into another category. So here you can see the ripples, the texture of water. You can see the texture that's rough of wood with a kind of a cockled pattern on it, as well as different corals and different shapes of plants, reflective properties, snake skin, looking at rough stones that are also smooth. They're hard to touch, but they're smooth to touch too. So those are really interesting, timeless things that you can add into spaces. You got the underside of a mushroom here that's very smooth as well. It's intricate and it's almost calming like a water would be, right? And then a little bit harsher of a slate and just different gnarly types of wood. So you can start to, again, look at these and classify them into different categories in your mind and see if each space you have has a good balance of texture. You don't want everything to feel cold and sleek. You want to make sure you have something that has a little bit of sheen to it, something that has a little bit of an organic feel to it, as well as something that's maybe a little bit more rustic. Even if you have a really contemporary clean line space, it's good to pair things for balance purposes because all of God's creation has a balance. He created man and woman. He created the trees with the bark on the base that's rough with the sleek leaves at the top, right? So we're going to see just a wide variety of style when we look at creation. And sure, you can hone in on your favorites in there, and you might be leaning a little bit more towards being sleek or being more traditional or being more rustic. Wherever you are on the spectrum, though, just consider your accessories as you go, ways that you can pull from the opposite end of the scale without committing to everything being the same. Oftentimes, when we go through the selections that are on the left column, the unformed and unfilled spaces, they can apply to many rooms in our house. So it's not something you're always going to have to sit with and relearn every time. Some of these things will become very automatic to you, but it's good to consider each room fresh and on its own so that your home doesn't feel stagnant, doesn't feel like you are monotone throughout everything, right? We want common denominators, we want cohesiveness, but it's fun to have a little bit of personality in each space as well. So we've just studied quite a bit of rhythm, pattern, and texture. Now we're going to jump into balance, scale, and proportion. So I mentioned a little bit before that we live on this paradigm called Earth that God created, and everything that we see around us helps to dictate what we think looks right, and we aren't even aware of it. There's something called the golden ratio, but I like to call it God's golden ratio. It's also called the Fibonacci sequence, based after the person who discovered or helped discover that there's a pattern to the quantity of petals and so many different things. We're going to go over a few of them today. So if you take this little math equation here, this ratio, 0 plus 1 equals 1, you bring that 1 down and put a 1 in front of it. 1 plus 1 equals 2. Carry the 2 down. You can see this pattern, the rhythm, and the numbers that are in blue are the numbers that are found all throughout creation. So next time you're outside, go and check out how many petals are on your flowers. Chances are you're going to see a 3, a 5, an 8, a 13, 21, 34, and so forth. You can see this little blue and red line here showing you the ratio. Now, what's even more incredible is that we are built with this ratio. If you stand up and take a look at your arm, stretch out your arm from your elbow to your wrist, and from your wrist to the tip of your fingers is that same ratio. It's built into our very own beings. So this is why we think things look right when they're in this type of scale. It's everything that our eyes are trained to look at. So if you take from your elbow to your wrist, that is the 60%, and then from your wrist to the fingertip is the 40%. So you're going to see this application, this balance and proportion when you're wanting to hang art above a mantle, or if you're trying to pick a coffee table size to fit your sofa. You can even break down this ratio further, going into something that we're going to look on the next slide a little bit closer. But you may have heard of the ratio of 30 and 10 when it comes to your accents. Let's take a little deeper dive. So as we explore a little bit more about scale and proportion, we can find it all throughout God's creation and nature. It's also called the golden spiral, and you can see that same dimensions we talked about from your arm to your wrist and your fingertips. What they did is they built the rectangles here, and you can put that same rectangle inside, and then put that same rectangle inside, and then following the exterior, you get this swirl. There's a lot more you can study on this. This is super high level. If this is piquing your interest as much as I geek out on it, please go check it out. You'll be even more amazed by God. But it takes on the same shape and pattern in hurricanes as our thumbprint, as the galaxy, as well as even unborn children in the womb have the same shape. So it's in every fiber of our being. This is why we like this scale and proportion so much. So here are some other unique examples of what God puts around our eyes that we've seen and how man recreates them in different ways. There's something called the Mandelbrot set. Again, you can go Google that if this fascinates you, but you can learn how if you take a broccoli and you keep breaking it apart and it keeps going and going, same thing for fractals and snowflakes. These branchular, different fractal branching, it's called, designs are all throughout for a little bit more of an organic free flow design. The leaves that are on top of trees in a forest come in this circular pattern, but then they leave this fractal pattern in between each other so that they all get enough light and oxygen. It's pretty remarkable. Also, the fractal branches, I'm sure you've seen this image before, where our lungs look like a tree, where, we're supplying the oxygen and carbon dioxide that we need for each other. So there's so much depth that you can go to, but we're just going to, again, keep it kind of high level and looking around like, oh, well, we've seen these patterns before. And then organically, there's some shapes of some bowls that kind of mimic some of it. And then the patterns that are within patterns, like a snowflake, we see that in cathedrals. We see it in so many different ways, in lace and all kinds of different things. And then even in modern design as well. Here are two images of the same mantle. A lot of times we just want to fill the space with things that we like, and you can see how the image on the left doesn't have order to it. And we can organize things and it'll maybe look a little tidier. But when we're talking about that ratio and relationship, if you take a look at the piece to the right, and I'll give an overlay in the next slide so you can see how it pertains to each other. But we've got the thirds. We've got 3 different groupings, which is a good way of laying things out when you're thinking about accessorizing and thinking about all that scale. The artwork above the mantle is that same relationship that we talked about with the 60-40. And then looking through the touches of color, you still have that relationship of the touches of blue creating a rhythm. We've got the different textures that we've talked about. There's a frame with texture that's a little bit more formal, kind of embossed. And then we've got a sleeker frame in front of that on the right. And then a glass for the sheen. And then you've got a little rustic character there in the middle, some organic movement with some flowers there on top of a leather-bound book. So there's all these different textures. You want to try and have a little bit of everything when you're considering how to layer, and as well as the size and height. A proper relationship between a piece of art and something below it, you never really want to exceed 12 inches. So keep that in mind. The sweet spot is kind of between 6 and 9 inches from the bottom of a piece of art to a sofa or a table to build that visual connection. If you float something up too high, it's going to lose disconnect. Now, when we think about what a triangle looks like, and I ask you to draw one, chances are you would draw it with the point at the top. Again, looking at the paradigm of the relationship of what God's put on earth, our eyes are just trained to automatically think of a triangle in that way. We usually don't think of a triangle as upside down, right? Because everything's grounded on earth. There's so many layers I could teach you on all of the theories behind all of this. But when it comes to something being above our eyesight, like this mantle is pretty high up, you're going to want to weight the negative space because you lose a little bit. It'll look a little bit more like it's that 9 to 12 inches when you're looking down. So if you have no idea what I'm talking about, Just raise your hand out in front of you and then dip your body down. Your hand didn't move, the object behind your hand didn't move, but you moved. So that makes the space a little bit narrower, if that makes any sense. And if you have more questions about this, please feel free to comment. I would love to know what areas I need to teach a little bit more on. But just thinking in that relationship of a triangle, how it's bottom heavy, you want to weight sometimes the relationship of something underneath, especially if it's above your center of your eye level. Another way of building connection between pieces of art and accessories is to have them overlap a little bit. So you can see the candle on the left is technically overlapping the height, kind of bridging that gap with the smaller items on the mantle here. And I have that overlay where you can see the spiral and how that relates to how wide something should be apart, and then it keeps going down smaller and smaller to the more intricate things. It's something that just helps our eyes. Our eyes love that movement that we create through the balance, scale, and proportion. And again, talking about this ratio with the golden spiral, you can do this with your color selections in your room as well. So you want to think about 60% being your main or your dominant hue, and then 30% being your secondary color or texture, and 10% being your accent. So these are rules you're going to hear all the time when you're studying design, but very rarely will you find out that it's all over creation. This is the way that God put the world around us for our eyes to enjoy. This tends to be everybody's favorite topic, color theory. Let's check it out together. Some of you might be familiar with the color wheel, but just in case you're not, it can be divided into two categories called warm and cool. When you think about warm, you think of a fire, something that is hot to touch. So those are your hot colors. Whereas if you think about something cool, you think about it being cold, like ice and snow and water. So it's kind of where we get those names. Visually speaking, colors actually radiate those types of feelings as well, subconsciously. And you can tend to find, hey, I like a little bit more of the colors down here or up here. And then you can understand really narrowing down your color selection on a very high level. I'm drawn more to warm. I'm drawn more to cool. Now, if you're drawn more to cool, you want to make sure you still, again, in those accents, have little touches of warmth. Otherwise, your spaces can feel pretty sterile. And the same is true with the visual temperature of warmth. You never want everything to be heavy on there, or the whole house will feel too heavy and hot. In fact, red can kind of radiate a sense of danger and give some people panic attacks, raising their blood pressure a little bit. So you want to be careful and have a good balance, but you can definitely identify typically if you're more of a warm or a cool person. So you can study colors throughout God's creation. We're also going to take a little look in some psychology behind colors, as well as some biblical relationships that we can find when we're thinking about colors. So black, it absorbs all of the other colors and it reflects no light. So it can be interpreted as a serious color. It's also associated with sophistication, depth, and has weight. Some people say it's good to have a splash of black in each space just for a grounding effect. Next, we'll talk about white. It offers a complete reflection, making a space feel larger. It's reflective and more open. In the Bible, it refers to holiness and purity of Christ. It can offer a feeling of clarity as well. Red is a warm color that radiates heat. We kind of talked a little bit about that when we looked at the color wheel. It evokes strong emotions of passion, love, intensity. It grabs our attention and creates excitement. It relates to the blood of Christ and our salvation. Orange is also a warm color that offers enthusiasm, excitement, and energy. It can raise caution and it can get your attention as well. It can also fatigue your eyes if you have too much of it. Think about an orange that you would eat. That's something that's natural, but you wouldn't want to necessarily do everything in that color. The color yellow is warm, cheerful, and pure. It energizes and is happy. It represents optimism and helps the brain actually to release serotonin. Isn't that amazing? That's what the sun does for us as well when we look outside. Gold represents the sovereignty of God. You can hear that God selected gold for a lot of the items in the tabernacle. It also can cause the eye strain if it's overused. So these are things you want in small doses. Green is associated with resurrection and health. It's welcoming, it's casual and comfortable. It encourages creativity. It's symbolic of money. It can give a sense of stability, and it makes us think of the grass and the earthly qualities found in God's creation. So, because our eyes are so used to seeing green and blue when we're outside, it's something that feels steady and reliable. The color blue is considered also a reliable color. It makes us feel safe and secure, and it's a grounding color that provides a solid foundation because we always know that sky is up there, right? And the water is just unchanging. It's calming and tranquil because we associate it with waters. It's also associated with peacefulness because of the water effect. And too much blue can make a space feel cold. So it's all about balance when it comes to that. And if you've not seen my other videos, I do have a little bit more in-depth biblical study about the color blue. So go check that out. Violet historically symbolizes royalty and wealth. It's a rich color with depth complexity. It was actually very costly to make some of the blues and violets, historically speaking, and it's something that you might want to Google as well. So if you didn't already, hopefully now you have a better understanding of what warm coolers are versus cool colors and why we want to have a little bit of balance of both. And hopefully you have a little bit more understanding of why colors make us feel, culturally speaking, different ways. We're going to talk a little bit more of the color theory tips and tricks that I've learned along the way, and also just to kind of help you know that you're not alone when it's hard to pick out colors. And I do encourage you to pray about a color. I know that sounds odd, but there are so many times where I will walk into a client's home and they will have 20 swatches up on a wall and they can't make up their mind. And it makes me think about, not condemning, but there's the story of the Tower of Babel, where they were trying to make a space for themselves and cut God out, right? They weren't considering him in all of their ways. And I feel like God gave them confusion, and he may give us confusion sometimes too when we don't lean on him for anything. And colors tend to be about our preferences. There's no getting around that, and there's nothing wrong with picking things that are preferences to you and your family. But I think that he can help to simplify and make our way straight. So why wouldn't we want to pray to him first? So let's take a look at some of these points that I've learned throughout the years and keeping him in mind all along the way. So lighting greatly affects how color looks in a designated space. So always view your color swatches on the wall in the rooms they are intended for. You want to avoid putting the color swatches on a flat table, on a horizontal surface, unless you're painting a table. And the reason for that is because the lights above will shine down on that color and it's going to give a 100% light saturation. This kind of troubleshoots the reason why you'll paint a wall after picking out a color and you're like, oh my goodness, it's so much darker. Because if you take any color and you lay it flat, it's going to be brighter with the light shining on it. Whereas if you hold it up against the wall, you lose a lot of that light value. So always check the color in your own lighting as well as on the wall. Decide how you want the room to feel. Calm, relaxing feeling. If that's what you're going for, choose cooler colors. If you want a feeling of energizing, choose warmer colors. Color comparison is key to developing an eye for color. I'm going to say that again. Color comparison is key to developing an eye for color. The way you do this is to hold one color next to another to evaluate the differences between the two. This helps to identify what's called undertones. So you can just have a gray and you might say, oh, I just want a gray. But every gray has a different undertone. It might be blue, it might be green, it might be pink. You're going to find different undertones to each and every hue that you come across. So you also want to shop with items together. As you've made selections in your fabric that we talked about earlier with your textures, you want to bring those swatches. Anything that's not too large, it can be hard to carry a giant cushion or a whole drawer with you, but do what you can to bring your home out with you to the store. And obviously designers have the whole store they can bring to you as well. But color saturations should relate room to room. And what that means is if you ever look at the palette of colors from the top to bottom, the saturation gets a little bit darker. That's if you were to take like a cloth and you were to dip this white cloth into red dye. It would come out pink the first time, right? And you keep dipping it over and over. It's going to get more saturated. So it's like a deepening of a color, a hue. And you want to make sure that there's a rhythm of that so that especially open concepts, that the room next to it doesn't feel super light when the next room feels heavy. Now you will change on that spectrum if you have a room with a lot of lighting in it. So you can go a little bit deeper to make sure that value kind of stays the same throughout your home. If there's a room in complete isolation, it can have its own fun color. Don't be afraid of that. But definitely with rooms that are a little bit more open to another, like a foyer, your transitional spaces, you want to make sure there's a good rhythm when it comes to the saturation value. You can select your inspiration pieces first in your space. There's endless possibilities for wall colors. So you can choose your fabric, your rug, or a personal item. There's less rugs to choose from than there are wall colors. So if you have a rug in the room, I recommend finding one that you like. If you have a piece of art that you love, that can be something to help you pick a color from. Also, your personal items, such as your clothing, can help to give you a concept of different patterns and colors that you have already an eye for that you favor, as well as your spouses or anyone else that you live with. So that can help you narrow down the search as well. And then I have here, you can have an accent wall that you want people to look at as a focal point. So think of it more as an architectural element, like a fireplace or where your headboard is, or this grand wall of windows. Don't just pick a random wall and say, I want that wall to be an accent. That can not be a super cohesive look for our eyes. And then I have lastly here, use nature as your guide and inspiration. So again, stepping outside, and when you travel, you might be like, oh, I really love, how this atmosphere feels. Why is it? Take a picture. See if there's a rhythm of colors that are speaking to you. And again, it might be a pattern or a texture or something else as well. But be inspired. Go outside and have some conversations with God and see what he reveals to you. Make him a part of this fun process. So you might be asking yourself about design styles. How does that come into play? I put together for you what I call the design style timeline. It's not exhaustive, but it has most of the key point ones that people recognize and some that you may not recognize as well. But I'm going to take you through the timeline, and I wanted to pause here for a moment. And there's not going to be talking throughout the timeline because I want you to do a few things. I want you to pay attention to the fact that we began in the Garden of Eden with perfection, with God's design, before it was mucked up with sin, right? And as you're watching this, it's okay to jot down some styles that you're attracted to. That's a little bit higher level, but I want to challenge you to go a little bit deeper. Think through, and it's okay if you watch this a few times to achieve this, but think through what are the things that are timeless. And chances are you're going to find that they are little elements that God has in creation. So when you're designing your home, you can lean on what do I like from this decade? What do I like from that decade? And so forth. And see if they are in alignment with something that your eyes can find in creation. That's how you will tell the test of time. The other thing I want you to pay attention to is look at the contrast throughout history. When you look at everything in order, you're going to find that man is fickle. We liked to just change things up. We had perfection that got messed up, and then we start primitive, and then we want to get fancy, and then after fancy, our eyes get fatigued with that, and we want things to be more rustic. Then our eyes get fatigued with that, and we want things to be sleek, and then we will go on this hamster wheel throughout the timeline. See if your eyes can spy that. We know that God is the only one who is the same yesterday, today, and forever.